Late last year, the US President Barack Obama made an extraordinary announcement. He formally apologised to the Guatemalan government for American medical experiments which had deliberately infected hundreds of people with syphilis to test the effectiveness of penicillin. Even though the experiments were conducted more than 60 years ago, there are families still suffering the consequences. And as David O'Shea reports, apologies and government inquiries don't come close to addressing their pain.
It was here, in Guatemala, hidden from public scrutiny, that the experiments took place. Conscripted soldiers, prisoners, prostitutes, the mentally ill, and even orphans like Marta Oriana, Guatemalans used by the US government as human guinea pigs.
Pues sí, porque como digo yo, para experimentar, ¿verdad? Como que fuéramos animales.
No one gave their consent, and they were certainly not informed that they were being infected with syphilis and gonorrhea.
¿Quién dijo que tenían que tener estas inyecciones? ¿Los americanos?
Sí, los americanos me fueron los que me pusieron esa inyección.
So then you have to ask, did they go back into the community? Did they spread this disease? Did we really give the people of Guatemala syphilis?
This is Tuskegee, Alabama, where the Guatemalan experiments were hatched. The site of America's most infamous medical experiment, which began in the 1930s and ran until the 70s, with the unambiguous title, Untreated Syphilis in the Male Negro. Here, doctors found African Americans already infected with syphilis and then left them untreated so that they could monitor their progress. They never told the men that they had the disease. It became a national disgrace.
I'm looking for the Pollard family gravesite because a number of the Pollard family people were in the Tuskegee study.
Historian Susan Reverby has spent over 20 years studying Tuskegee and knew some of the men.
So Mr. Pollard definitely died of syphilis and was in the study. And then the other people, this is his wife, I don't know. We don't know what happened to the wives.
One of the doctors, John Cutler, still defended the Tuskegee study more than 20 years after it was exposed in the press and stopped, saying,
"These individuals were contributing towards the health of the black community, rather than simply serving as guinea pigs for the study."
Even then, Cutler didn't want his guinea pigs to be finally treated for the syphilis they'd carried for decades.
It would be undesirable to go ahead and use large amounts of penicillin to treat the disease because it would interfere with the study.
It was while researching Cutler's role in Tuskegee that Susan Reverby made the remarkable discovery last year that he was head of another, much more invasive experiment started in 1946 in Guatemala.
I was just completely shocked. I had spent, nearly 20 years explaining to everyone that no one had been given syphilis in Tuskegee, and here was a study with the title, Inoculation Syphilis, done by this man who had been involved in Tuskegee in the 60s, and then in the 90s is essentially justifying the study, and I was completely, nobody knew about this.
I see him as an evil man because of the undeniable circumstances that when he was told to discontinue the experiments in the US because they were illegal and ethically wrong, decided to look for a place where he could literally get away with it.
Terry Collingsworth is a Washington-based human rights lawyer representing the Guatemalans who have emerged to file a class action lawsuit against the US government.
The fact that they went to Guatemala is partly, at least, due to the fact that everyone understood that Guatemala was a place where there were no rights for poor people or people in prison, and that you could pretty much do what you wanted with them. So to take advantage of that kind of situation certainly multiplies the crime.
Collingsworth has a local lawyer handling the case in Guatemala.
Aquí están las personas y aquí está su nombre, Marta Cesarea Pérez Ruiz. Y aparte cuando ya se incluyan ya sus hijos, pero todos están ya en la demanda. Aparte de usted hay otras personas.
Some claim to be direct victims, and others, like Marta Cesarea's children, descendants of victims. One of them was born without a brain, and her severely disabled daughter was born with syphilis. Syphilis is a disease which, if not treated early enough, can lead to serious physical and mental illness and can even kill.
Allá le detectaron a ella la sífilis. Pues decía el médico que saber qué enfermedad tenía yo, pero casi no, cuando él detectó era la sífilis, sí, ajá, y las dos. Entonces nos pusieron con penicilina bien doble, dijo el médico, para, ¿verdad? Porque está muy avanzado.
I'm about 3 hours from the Guatemalan capital, on the way to meet some former soldiers who were directly infected in the experiments. Now well into their 80s, they're some of the only known survivors.
Aquí es donde vamos a llegar a mi casa, donde vive Federico Mesa.
They're lucky to have lived this long. Many of the other victims died years ago.
Él es mi papá.
Federico Ramos Mesas was forcibly conscripted into the army in 1946 and soon became an unwitting participant in the study. He says he was subjected to a series of tests and treatments, but was never told what it was for.
No podía decir que no. Media vez me cayera bien.
¿Por qué no puede decir que no?
Que me inyectaron. Y en ese tiempo, después fue que resulté con eso.
Cuando usted se casó, ¿le pegó esa enfermedad a su esposa?
Más o menos, sí.
Not far from here is another affected family whose father was also forced into the army at the same time. They say syphilis killed him.
A él lo inyectaban cada 15, cada mes, pero nunca le dijeron a él para qué. Entonces cuando él salió del ejército, él vino a sufrir esas mismas consecuencias ya aquí ya. Él se juntó con mi mamá. Y entonces esa misma enfermedad le causó la muerte a él y infectó a mi mamá.
Their mother died with an open sore on her hip.
Que ella sí sufrió enorme ese dolor.
Le fue creciendo todo y todo hasta que, y es una pierna, hasta de una vez se le cayó cuando ella botó la piel, ¿verdad?
Victoria has been clinically blind since she was very young and believes it was the result of her father's illness.
Y yo le dije que yo no miraba bien. Y entonces él me llevó a un centro de salud, pero y le dijeron que me llevara a un lugar, pero como no había piso, no me llevó, y así me quedé. Ajá.
Hay otros exsoldados afectados, pero no sabemos quiénes son porque ya murieron. Sí, ya
¿Su
murieron.
familia puede ser en otros lugares?
Sí, en otros lugares está, pero no sabemos nosotros quiénes son.
Y pasando la enfermedad de sus nietos y los bisnietos.
Sí, porque esto es una,
siguiendo, ¿no?
Ajá, una cadena que se va afectando, ¿verdad?
Almost everything we know about the Guatemalan study is from these notes and letters in US archives.
On Friday the 9th, we performed another experiment, inoculating 6 patients with pus and treating 3 of them.
Dr. Cutler's own correspondence, this one to his boss at the Public Health Service in New York, reveals he was well aware they were overstepping boundaries.
I hope that it would be possible to keep the work strictly in your hands, without necessity for outside advisors or workers other than those who fit into your program and who can be trusted not to talk. Sincerely, John C. Cutler.
Deeper into the Guatemalan countryside, I'm going to meet another former soldier infected by syphilitic prostitutes planted in the barracks by the doctors.
Ya vamos a llegar después del río.
Mucho gusto, yo soy David, un periodista australiano.
Yo soy Manuel Guriel.
Mucho gusto y un placer conocerlo.
Descanso que sea por aquí en la sombra.
Okay.
Pero la noticia está que esa enfermedad vino de los gringos a Guatemala. Ajá. Y por eso es que se extendió la enfermedad esa. Porque fíjese que en ese tiempo las mujeres eran baratas de cuarto. Valían 25 y 50 y un quetzal. ¿Qué no entraba? Pero nunca piensa uno la enfermedad que tiene.
He remembers being treated by American doctors at the military hospital.
Me vacunaron como 8 días y de ahí me echaron para el cuartel, porque usted sabe que en el cuartel solamente que no puede andar, pero está firme. Me fui y empecé.
Sadly, Guriel will never know how the legal case ends. Not long after this interview, he died.
Ya no voy a ir donde la chica.
Ya no más.
Ya no.
Bueno, adiós.
Que le vaya bien.
Adiós, adiós.
I think every person who got infected, however the methodology was a victim of a serious crime, an invasive crime. Your body is your temple, so to speak, and to have someone without telling you expose you to a disease that would damage you is a really serious crime. But they did it with children, and to me that takes another level of wrong.
Behind these walls in the capital, Guatemala City, is the orphanage. The complex covers an entire city block. It was somewhere inside here 64 years ago that a then 10-year-old Marta Orellana says her nightmare began.
Y me acostaron en una camilla. Entonces un doctor estaba de este lado y el otro, y la enfermera me tenía agarrada la cabeza. Entonces ellos hicieron por abrirme las piernas, ¿verdad? Y yo no quería. Entonces yo, como niña de 10 años, con sus fuerzas que podía tener, ¿verdad? Yo no quería y yo hacía lo posible porque no. Entonces ellos decían, no se puede, no se puede.
She says the director, Dr. Cofiño, hit her in the face to get her cooperation.
Entonces ellos empezaron, no sé si eran gasas o algodones, no sé, pero ellos me abrieron las piernas y me hicieron ese examen en mis partes, pues, y me metían los dedos con algodón y iba de meterlos y los ponían en una cajita que ellos tenían hacia un lado y yo lloraba, pues, porque una niña, pues, me dolía, ¿no?
After this, she became so sick, she says she was bedridden for weeks. The next time she was called in, it was in a group of 10 girls.
Me volvieron a llamar y entonces ahí fue donde me pusieron con la cabeza hasta los pies, me doblaron y me sacaron el líquido de la columna. Entonces yo sí, cuando ellos me sacaron la aguja, yo, curiosa como niña, ¿verdad? Volteé a ver así y así fue el poco de que me sacaron de la columna, amarillo.
Well, to intentionally infect children with a disease so that you can test drugs on them, it really sinks to about the lowest of the lows in the 7 levels of hell.
It's still unclear whether the experiments ended when Dr. Cutler left in 1948. Questions remain about this former mental asylum and whether testing continued here. One man, who is also listed as a plaintiff, is convinced that years after Dr. Cutler left, his brother was experimented on here. One day he escaped and made it home, complaining doctors were constantly injecting him. Even though he didn't smoke, his pockets were full of cigarettes.
Entonces mi mamá decía, ¿por qué aparece con cajetillas de cigarros de Víctor? Decía así y le aparecían en ese uniforme. Entonces yo por eso doy de que sí, les daban cigarrillos a ellos en ese tiempo.
¿Para pagar?
Para que ellos se dejaran hacer cualquier cosa que quisieran los médicos ahí.
It's recorded in Cutler's notes that participants were given cigarettes for their participation. Another suspicious footnote is that years after the experiments are supposed to have ended, Marta Oriana says she was followed by one of the doctors involved in the experiments she endured as a 10-year-old child. She feared he wanted to continue his experiments on her.
Ahí andaba él hasta una vez que andábamos en la Aurora, en el zoológico. Una de mis compañeras me dijo, Chata, mira, me dijo, ahí anda el doctor aquel, me dijo que estuvo allá. ¿Dónde? Le dije, en aquel carro negro, mira, me dijo.
¿Pero por qué?
Andaba preguntando por vos, me dijo. ¿Pero para qué? Le dije yo. A saber, mejor andate con la seño, me dijo. Entonces yo me fui con la señorita y ahí me puse a la par de ella, porque digo yo que él a mí me quería secuestrar.
After what she's learned studying two of the world's worst-known examples of medical malpractice, Susan Reverby says anything is possible.
I mean, I think not exactly the same. I mean, most studies still have to go through institutional review boards, but clearly some kind of study that we will be equally shocked about is obviously going on right this minute somewhere else in the developing world, for sure.
David O'Shea filming and reporting there, and David tells us that the official Guatemalan inquiry into the outrage is due this month. Meanwhile, lawyers will be meeting US authorities in August, and they're hoping for a speedy compensation agreement. For more background on the story, go to our website. Plus, there are links to the work of John Cutler and Susan Reverby at sbs.com.au/Dateline.